So, as you can see from this first slide here, we've got a kind of chaotic setup here and simplified right in the middle. The message I have for you today is based on a sermon by Chip Ingram, who is an American pastor, author, and teacher. And the sermon is from a series he did called Spiritual Simplicity, Doing Less, Loving More. And this particular message, All You Need Is Love, addresses something that has crept into Western culture in the last sort of 20, 30, 40 years. It's hard to know exactly when it started, and actually I think it was something that has happened gradually. But it was far less noticeable 50 years ago and almost non-existent 100 years ago. I'm referring to what I've called the get-ahead treadmill of life. Have you noticed the pace of life around you? It's like people are on a treadmill, right? A very fast-paced treadmill. And see this guy here just kind of captures what many of us, I think, feel. See, I call this the get-ahead treadmill of life. And the idea is, well, you've got to work till 6 or 7, maybe 8 o'clock at night, or go work somewhere else. There's so many things that take our time. There's kids coaching, soccer, tennis, whatever it is. We've got to run them here, run them there. And then there's academics. Well, I hear that these guys are getting tutoring for their kids. They're pretty young, but they're getting tutoring like 3 times a week. I've got to do that too, otherwise my kids will get behind. And then there's thinking, okay, well, I've heard this is the best school. I've got to get my kids into that school. But wait, to do that, I've got to move into that school zone. The houses are really expensive in that school zone. Okay, I need to make some more money. Okay, so I've got to work longer hours, maybe get a second job, and it ramps up, and it ramps up, and it ramps up. Has anybody else experienced the fast pace of life these days? See, the get-ahead treadmill of life is about pressure and about demand and about making it happen. Right? There's this constant pressure 24/7. It's got to be better, it's got to be bigger, it's got to be faster. And then if things get better and bigger and faster, then you look at what you've got, and it's got to be more. So the treadmill just speeds up, and it produces something. It produces this desire to be all and to do all and to have it all. But our lives reflect that I've got to be it all. I've got to do it all. I've got to have it all. We all feel this pressure. You'll notice on your notes there are 3 things that over time this will produce. It creates a very, very complex world. One that moves too fast, delivers too little, and demands too much. So the question I want to look at with you is it possible to break free? Right? Is it possible to break free of this high speed, high pressure, high demand, guilt-producing way of life? Well, how do we diagnose the problem here? See, if we were to visit the Simplify Your Life doctor, this is a special kind of doctor, the Simplify Your Life doctor, what would he or she say? See, when we see it's a world that moves too fast, delivers too little, and demands too much. But if we were to visit the Simplify Your Life doctor, what would they say? So when you go to the doctor, you know that they ask you a bunch of questions, right? Questions like, well, how long have you had this? Is there any history of this in your family? Tell me about your diet. Tell me about your exercise. So they ask a lot of these questions, and that's how they do a diagnosis, right? They need to get this information. So from a Simplify Your Life perspective, the question I want to ask is, what do you want to be known for? What do you want to be known for? That's the first question, because there's something behind the bigger, better, faster, and more. There's something in you and something in me that creates this drive and this pressure and this demand to be more, to do more, and to have more. And it's rooted in, what do you really want to be known for? And if you asked a bunch of people, you might get answers like, Well, I want to be known as a kind and loving person. I want to be known as a person who's fair. Other people might say, I want to be known as a great mum or a great dad. I want to be known as an excellent student. Some people might say, I want to be known as a person who is very knowledgeable or very wise. So if you had to write it down, I want to be known for, what would you write? What would you write? And let me refine the question. If you had to answer with just one word, what would you want to be known for? So this is one word where, if you're a parent, your kids would say, yeah, that describes my mum or my dad. Or if you're married, your spouse would say, yeah, you know what, this is one word that characterizes, when I think of my spouse, that's it. Or one word that really epitomizes what my closest friends think of me. So think about what that one word might be for you. There are probably a lot of good solutions, but there's one word that, no matter what word you came up with, if it's not this word, then your word is a distant second. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be a good mum or a good dad, or a successful business person or athlete or artist, whatever it is. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be very knowledgeable or wise. There's nothing wrong with any of these things. These desires are fine, but if you fulfill all those desires, but if you don't fulfill this one word, then according to God, all of those are not like a close second, they're like a distant second. And if this one word does not describe my life and your life, but we will find ourselves missing what matters most. And I'm convinced that the only way to simplify your life is to get really clear on what matters most, right? Really clear on what actually matters. So if you haven't guessed it already, the word is love. See, the Apostle Paul would write one sort of overarching theme. One overarching principle. And for those mathematicians out there, I'm going to express this mathematically. Anything minus love equals nothing. Anything minus love equals nothing. And going even further than that, everything minus love equals nothing. So, any success, any achievement, any status, any power. And then he's going to tell us that we could have all of this, in our lives, but without love, everything minus love equals nothing. And you might ask, well, where does that come from in Scripture? That's a good question. I'm glad you asked. If we take a look at the book of 1 Corinthians, we see Paul writing to a church that had a lot of problems. When you look at the city of Corinth at that time, there was serious immorality going on there. Here's a short excerpt from my study Bible. Like any large commercial city, Corinth was a centre for open and unbridled immorality. The worship of Aphrodite fostered prostitution in the name of religion. At one time, 1,000 sacred prostitutes served her temple. So widely known did the immorality of Corinth become that the Greek verb to Corinthianize came to mean to practice sexual immorality. In a setting like this, it is no wonder that the Corinthian church was plagued with numerous problems. See, in Corinth, the things that matter most were not going very well. It seems someone came to Paul and told him what was going on in the Corinthian church. Yeah, you know that church? Well, they're not doing very well, and here's all the issues. In the first 4 chapters in 1 Corinthians, in the first 4 chapters or so, Paul is describing what he's been told about the church. He talks about, well, they're suing one another, and there's these divisions in the church, and there's all these things about living, when you think about all things about living the way Jesus said, they're just not doing these very well in Corinth. It's not what you taught. And then later, Paul gets a letter, and they have a number of questions. They have questions about marriage and questions about singleness. and questions about divorce, and questions about lawsuits, and about the Lord's Supper, and questions about all kinds of things. The gifts of the Spirit, and about spiritual maturity. And so Paul is writing this letter to address all these specific issues. And one of the issues, he gets to it in chapter 12. In verse 1 he says, Now concerning spirituals. Now in most of our Bibles it says spiritual gifts. But in the Greek it literally says spirituals. Because if you study all through those chapters very carefully, what you understand is that the major overarching issue of chapters 12, 13 and 14 isn't gifts. It's actually about spiritual maturity. Or what does it mean to be spiritual? Because the Corinthians believed that what made you spiritual was speaking in tongues, speaking a language that they hadn't learned. And they felt that, the really spiritual people had this gift. Paul will argue in chapter 12 that may be a very important gift, but the most important gift is prophecy. Why? Because firstly, it benefits other people. Secondly, it reveals God's truth. So, just as an aside, our spiritual gifts are not for us to sit and soak in. You're not sort of something to have as our own cool thing. Look at me, I've got this gift and this gift. Isn't that cool? It's not something to boast about. They're actually given to us for a purpose, and it's to bless those around us, to build up the church. And then look at how Paul ends chapter 12. He's just talked about all these gifts and their role in spiritual maturity. And then he says, right at the end of chapter 12, Now let me show you a more excellent way. And then he goes into chapter 13. He says, If I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all my possessions to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, but have not love, I gain nothing. Notice the repetition there. But have not love, but have not love, but have not love. Just as an interpretive note, if you see something repeated in the Bible, that's important. That's really important. Repetition is one of the primary devices used in the Bible to emphasize the importance of something. So Paul is comparing everything else here with love as the benchmark, right? As the gold standard. So he takes their gift that they esteem, that they hold so highly, the speaking in tongues, and he says, this ability to speak in another language that you haven't learned, if you could even speak it in angels' languages, but you don't do it with love, do you guys really think this is the most important gift? If you don't do it with love, you just become like a gong and a clanging cymbal. And what he's referring to here is their background. See, in their background in pagan worship, they believed that you had to wake up the gods. You had to wake them up. And the way they would do that is that they would start their pagan festivals. They got this, they'd go these loud noise-making things, and they'd just go bang, clang, bing, bong, and they're trying to wake up the gods. And they make all this noise that didn't have any sense to it. And so Paul is having a little dig here, because he says to them, because there's no love in this group, in the Corinthian church. There's no love in the group. They've got a lot of gifts, but they treat each other badly. They gossip about each other. There's division in the church. There's disunity. They've got all kinds of dysfunctions. And he's saying, you really want to be spiritual? If you had this greatest gift ever, right, this one you think is so hot, this ability to speak in other languages, but without love, you become like a gong or a clanging cymbal. In other words, you basically become like the beginning of one of your old pagan worship services. So you're just making noise. In other words, it produces nothing. Right, if you think of it in terms of the output, what actually comes out of it, it produces nothing without love. Then notice he says, if I have the gift of prophecy. So we can see that he started with, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels. Okay, so the if I speak is about performing, something I do. And now he moves to, if I have the gift of prophecy. So the if I have, that's now something you possess. So we've moved from performing to possessing. Then he goes back to his kind of spiritual hierarchy where, speaking in tongues is down here and then prophesying is here because it reveals God's truth and it benefits others. And he's saying even prophecy as the higher one, even that, because even if you know the mysteries and have all this knowledge, and even if you have a faith that can do supernatural things like move mountains, even if you can do all that, if you do that without love, not only does it not produce anything, you become nothing. Notice it says, if I have a faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. I am. That's about your essence. It's about who you are. So if you do all this without love, you become nothing. Then finally he says, if I'm so incredibly generous, even sacrificially generous, you think of tithing, 10%, well, you've gone way beyond that, 20, 30, 40, 50%. And your sacrificial giving is not just your money, it's your life. So you would even lay down your life. And you're doing that for others. In other words, you are providing for them by doing all this. But if you don't do it out of love, it profits you nothing. So let me just summarize love's supremacy here. In taking what Paul has written and applying it to us, there is some translation because the context is very different. See, Paul is speaking to them about the focus they need to have, a focus on love. But applying this to love, we can say that performing in your world with the greatest gifts and abilities without love produces nothing. It produces nothing. See, we so often focus on performing because when we perform, we get this good feedback, right? We get the affirmation. And although this is not like the sincere love from in-depth relationships, it still feels good, right? This affirmation. It's a cheap substitute, but it makes us feel good. Second, possessing the best, the finest, the most amazing things you can imagine, without love, you become nothing. Now, in the context, Paul is talking about possessing these impressive spiritual gifts, but the principle is about things we possess. So today, if you think about it today, what you possess in terms of your position, your privilege, what you possess in terms of the esteem of others, in terms of your reputation, and how quickly you're moving up the corporate ladder. Maybe it's what you possess in terms of what your kids have achieved, how fast they can run compared to other kids, how hard they can hit the ball. And this is all kind of what you think of as what you possess. And then you think about, if that's what you want to be known for, all these things, then it's no wonder that people are living such frantic lives, because they're trying to structure their lives in such a way that their kids can do all this, and they've got all this, and all the plates are spinning, and they've got everything that the world says is important. And lives become just frantically busy, where you move around quickly and you hardly actually connect with those around you. So you become nothing. Third, sacrificially providing for those you love, right? The greatest cause on earth. Without love, it profits you nothing. See, I don't think any of us are actually trying to live complex, crazy lives. But here's the thing. It's very easy to buy into a lie, particularly when the lie is covered in significant amounts of truth, or when the lie is a truth that's been distorted. In this case, it's very easy to think, well, I've got to provide this for my kids, and I've got to provide that for my kids, and well, these guys, they've bought that for their children, so I've got to buy that too, just to keep up. Or just to be seen as keeping up. Or sometimes we buy into the lie that, well, if I don't buy this and for my kids and all their friends have it, my kids will stop liking me. Well, no, your kids won't. Your kids don't need this and that, and all these things that they may tell you. See, they may tell you they need these things, but when they say they need this and they need that and need that, actually what they're meaning is they want this and they want that. There's a big difference. See, what they need more than you buying them stuff is you actually spending time with them. That's what they need far more, spending quality time with them. See, in the long run, looking at the big picture of your relationship with your children, spending quality time with them will have a far bigger positive impact on your relationship with them than just buying them stuff. And then there's providing for yourself. I need to provide this and that and until I can accumulate this much and then I'll be set up. Then I'll be well set up. And before you know it, you're building an earthly empire. We have all these things that we put under the umbrella of providing, right? We've got all these things that we put under there. And yes, we do need to provide for our families, right? The Bible's very clear on that. But sometimes I think we put more under that umbrella than actually should be there, under the providing umbrella. It's a very subtle thing, but the result is a life treadmill that just goes faster and faster and faster. Chip Ingram summarizes it this way, and I'm just going to quote what he says because I think he says it very well. He says, "Many of us live very hurried, overextended, complex lives with shallow, superficial relationships, even with our closest friends and families, because we have unconsciously learned to believe performing well, possessing much, and providing stuff is what life is all about." Now, I want to be clear that I'm not speaking to you today as someone who has got all this figured out, right? Someone who has solved the problem and who has simplified my life perfectly according to God's will. I'm still working on this. So this message is for me as much as anybody. I'm actually preaching to myself today. If you guys benefit from this, great, but I'm preaching to myself. Because there's this constant battle of fighting against this belief system that possessing, performing, and providing is what life is all about. Even the altruistic, I'm going to provide for my family, can result in the pace of life being ratcheted up to a speed that's really unhealthy, a speed that isn't good for your marriage, a speed that isn't good for your parenting, and a speed that kills friendships. So what can we do about this? Well, a prescription for transformation. So if that's the diagnosis, what would the doctor say? What would the Simplify Your Life doctor say? Prescription number one is to simplifying your life is focus, right? Simple, focus. But now this is not rocket science, right? This is not particularly insightful. And simply put, we're doing too much. We're trying to accomplish too much. We're trying to get our kids involved in too much. We need to do less, but do it in a deeper, more relational way. We need to do the things that matter most. But I think most of us know these things. I think we've tried to do it, but it's kind of like a New Year's resolution. It lasts for a few days or maybe a couple of weeks, and then that's it. Which brings me to prescription number two. And here is something which is a great insight. You can only do less when you purpose to love more. You can only do less when you purpose to love more. And this really is the kind of a light bulb moment, right? Because I think most of us know about basic time management techniques. You make a list of all the things you need to do. You've got your A's, your B's, your C's. You do your A's before your B's, before your C's. And, if getting this right was just a matter of tweaking your schedule, maybe spend a little bit less time on this, a little bit less time on that, get my prioritization right. If that was what all this was about, well, we're all smart people here. We would have figured it out by now, right? What we need is a paradigm shift in the way we think. What we need is a new mindset. See, Chip Ingram told of a time he was in Zimbabwe visiting orphans, and he was struck by the simplicity of their lives. The thinking there is, I love God. I love these people. They love me. We want to help others in the way that we've been helped. That's it. That's it. How clarifying is that? See, when you purpose to love more, you now have a concrete criterion for deciding how to use your time. Looking through the lens of how can I love more, some things in your to-do list will naturally kind of bubble their way to the top. And while other things will kind of move down and some will ultimately drop off your to-do list. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But admittedly, it can be tough to let go of some things, particularly when you've been doing them for years, when they've become ingrained habits. So for me, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I sometimes spend longer on things than I actually need to. I sometimes overanalyze things a little. And Tina's sitting there thinking, a little bit? But this may help. It does for me. We all have the same amount of time. We all have 168 hours each week. And your choice to say yes to spending time on this thing is a choice to say no to spending time on this other thing. In this case, your choice to say yes to something that should be lowered down on your priority list or have even dropped off, it's a choice to not love others more. And that's a sobering thought, because each of us will one day stand before God and have to give an account of how we spent our time. So just to be clear, this is not saying you can't have any fun. It's not saying you can't just chill out and watch some TV or something every now and then. The question is, how are you prioritizing your time? What criteria are you using to decide how you spend this short time you have here on earth? And I've come to realize it's a really short time. As I look back, I think, man, where did all these years go? It flies by. See, it's so easy for extra things to get added to your schedule. Chip had a helpful realization regarding this. He says, my no isn't strong enough to keep stuff off my plate until I have a lot stronger yes. Right? My no is not stronger to keep stuff off my plate until I have a much stronger yes. See, it's easy to say no to things when you're saying yes to loving more. So I don't know how well you can see that up there. It's come through okay. So for all of us, we have, and this is a bit of a simplification, but we all have, broadly speaking, two sets of values and priorities that kind of are, that shape us and that are input into our thinking. We have God's values and priorities, and then the world's values and priorities that we're sort of bombarded with constantly. And by the world, what I'm meaning is the structures and the institutions and the systems of thought that go against God's ways. We're bombarded by those all the time. Whenever you watch TV, whenever you're on social media, these ideas, these values, they come through very loudly and very repetitively. So we all have these two sort of sets of ideas coming in. And in the middle, we have this decision-making process. And that's key. What happens in there? This decision-making process really determines your life. What do you do with that? We can't insulate ourselves from the input from the world's values. They're there. They're always going to be there. But we can decide what happens in that decision-making process. And what happens inside this box depends on your worldview, right? Your understanding of reality, and specifically your definition of success. How do you define success? Well, a prescription for transformation number 3 is begin to redefine success. We need to redefine success from how did I do? Because that's a performance question. Mum, how did I do? Dad, how did I do? Teacher, how did I do? Coach, how did I do? Corporate earnings, how did I do? Change that to who am I becoming? You might even write right above the question, how did I do? Performance. That's about performance. Then put an arrow across to who am I becoming? Because that's a character question. It's about character. Secondly, redefine success from what do I have? See, that's about possessions. What do I have? Put an arrow from that and move to how am I using it? How am I using it is about stewardship. So not what do I have, but how am I using it? And the third question is not how much do I give, but rather why do I give? See, how much do I give? That's about providing. But why do I give? That's motive. And motive's far more important. It goes from providing to motive. So, if love is the answer, what is love? Well, in 1 Corinthians 13, it's often referred to as the love chapter. And the question, where do you often hear this chapter used? At weddings, exactly. It's frequently used at weddings. But that wasn't exactly what Paul had in mind when he wrote this. In fact, his purpose in writing this was quite different. See, he doesn't even define love in 1 Corinthians 13. He gives us instead 15 descriptions of love, beginning at verse 4. You're probably familiar with, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, and it goes on. There are 15 descriptions of love in this chapter. To understand the actual purpose Paul had in mind when he wrote this, we need to look at the context of chapter 13. Now, the immediate context is chapters 12 and 14, which are all about spiritual gifts, the speaking in tongues and prophecy. But more broadly, these chapters are about spiritual maturity because they connect back to the first few chapters of 1 Corinthians that we looked at before. Remember, we saw in those chapters about all the problems going on in the Corinthian church. There are divisions, there's fighting, there's bickering, there's resentment, there's disunity and factions developing. People are suing each other. There's sexual immorality like you wouldn't believe. A guy is sleeping with his father's wife. I mean, this Corinthian church is dysfunctional. So the 15 descriptions of love we see in chapter 13 are actually correctives to all of this dysfunctional behavior that we see in the Corinthian church. So, he's saying, instead of dividing, because some of them are saying, I follow Paul, and another group saying, I follow Apollos, another group saying, I follow Cephas. They're completely missing the point. All these guys are actually working, all these apostles, Paul, Apollos, Cephas, they're working together for the same cause. But these guys are dividing over who they follow. And there's this disunity, they're suing each other. So Paul's saying, no, instead of dividing over these guys, live this way, right? 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Instead of disunity and bickering, live this way. Instead of suing each other, live this way. Instead of sexual immorality, live this way. So everything we see in 1 Corinthians 13, it's actually correctives to all of this stuff that we see going on earlier in this book. Because if we're going to love more, we need to have an accurate understanding of what love is. Because the danger is that we will think that love is a sentimental Hollywood-style ooey-gooey feeling. It's all about emotions. Now, there's nothing wrong with emotions, but God gave us those too. But is that what love actually is? Is that what biblical love is? Because here's the question. If simplifying your life never works by just saying you're going to do less, but the secret is loving more, the fundamental question is, what is love and how do I practice it? What does it really mean to be loving? When we look at these 15 descriptions, we see that love is not an emotion, it's not a good feeling, but a choice to treat other people in a way that you cannot do without God's power, in a way that you can only do with God's goodness, grace, and love working in you and through you. So I'll leave it for another time to dig into each of these 15 descriptions, but for now I want to leave you with a little assignment. You might want to write these down. What does your life and schedule indicate you want to be known for? What does your life and schedule indicate you want to be known for? And actually, when you think about it, for each one of us, there are two lists, aren't there? Two lists of priorities. One is what we say are our priorities, right? What comes out of our lips. And we might actually intellectually believe that this is our list of priorities. The other list is what our lives actually say is our priorities. How do we actually spend our time? And these are two different lists. So if you look at what your life and schedule indicate what you want to be known for, that's a really honest question to answer, and answer it according to what your life actually looks like. Second, what's the biggest barrier to you slowing down and simplifying your life? What's the biggest barrier? Maybe get together with someone you trust over a coffee to talk about that one. And third, how can you begin to be more loving this week, and with whom? Just focus on one person. Just focus on one person, the first name that comes to mind right now as you think about this. It might be someone who needs some practical help, someone who you know just needs to have some of your time to talk. It might be someone you need to forgive. Who comes to mind when you think about that? Let's pray. Lord, in this complex, fast-paced world, help us to slow down. Help us to simplify our lives. May each of us take seriously the question, what do I want to be known for? Help us to remember that love is supreme. Love is the highest goal. And that anything we do, anything we have, anything we give, if it is without love, it is nothing. And as we look to simplify our lives, may we intentionally purpose to love more. And may that drive us to focus, to let go of those things that do not align with loving more. Lord, I pray that each one of us would define success in your terms, according to your will. Instead of being performance-driven and asking, how did I do? May we ask, who am I becoming? Instead of what do I have, may we ask, how am I using it? And instead of how much do I give, may the question be, why do I give? Ultimately, Lord, we recognize that we can only love the way you call us to love with your power. May we each be open to your Spirit working in us and through us to empower us to bring your love, your transformational love, to a world that desperately needs it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.